What's going on, everybody? And welcome into the 122nd episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, career advice, all sorts of other stuff to help empower creative people. Now remember, you can listen to all the shows, get the show notes, and a whole lot more. Just head over to thecrazy1.com. It's the words the crazy and the number 1.com. And do me a favor, next time you're on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review for the show. Could just be hitting the stars, could be writing a couple words, but do me a favor and let people know what you think, if you've gotten any value out of any of these, because it brings more people into the show, lets me know that there's actually value out there, and as a result, you get more episodes. And if you want to follow up with any of my adventures or just have any questions or things like that, you can always feel free to follow or interact or ask questions. You can follow me personally on Twitter or Instagram, and you can follow the show on LinkedIn or Facebook. Now, it's an interesting episode today because every week I do 3 30-minute free mentoring sessions on the Amazing Design People list. Now, I've talked about this platform before. If you don't know what it is, go check it out. It's at adplist.org. And it really is a place where you can get free mentoring, free career advice, and things like that. Now, I love doing it. I love helping people. Obviously, that's why I do this show. And it, in a lot of ways, it sort of helps keep me connected globally with what's going on in the creative community. Now, through all those mentoring sessions, I honestly really consistently get asked 2 questions. And so those are the questions I want to focus on helping to answer for more people today. One of the biggest ones I get asked is, how should I decide if I should quit my job and go do something new? Especially in these days after the pandemic, a lot of people are frustrated. A lot of people are feeling like their corporate job isn't working, that their boss doesn't understand them, that they just have different goals for their life. And so how do they figure out, really, is it worth sticking it out and figuring out if, this is going to work out for them, or do you go find something new? Now, the other question, which is not going to sound like it is at all related to the first one, but I'll show you in a minute how it is they'll come to me and say, look, Steve, I've worked for my job for X number of years, and I feel like I should be promoted. I feel like, I've talked to my boss, or I've done these things that I'm ready for the next level. And they aren't really sort of being very forthcoming. They're not really, it doesn't feel like I'm going to get this promotion. And it feels like maybe I'm starting to overstay my welcome. What do I do? And now look, I think the chances are that if you're listening to this episode, then you're probably trying to figure out one of those problems. And like I said, while these 2 questions may seem like they are worlds apart, I've found that they actually can share the same approach to getting you the answers and ultimately really the action that you need. So in this episode, I want to go through what I think is actually a pretty simple process you can use that will help you really sort of understand what are the issues that you're dealing with, or what are the things that need to get solved, how to approach and have a conversation really with your boss or with your leadership to try to get that resolved. And then ultimately lay out some consequences and lay out, really just in an open conversation, what's going to happen if nothing happens. And ultimately, it's all in service of trying to get you some answers. And look, that's what I said before, is while trying to get promoted or trying to decide if you should quit, feel like they're at very different stages of your career or your career journey, I think they both share some things. I think they both share the need for clarity of understanding where do you stand. I think they share a need for you to try to understand, should you continue to invest in a leader or an organization that may or may not be willing to reciprocate and invest in you. I think you're looking for something to change or there to be some action. And I think ultimately what you're really trying to figure out is, what is the way forward? Now, in one case, it's, taking the next step in your career and getting promoted. The other one is maybe taking the next step and going on to a new position. But I think that they both, and this comes out in a lot of the coaching sessions that I do, I think they both share the fact that you might actually be the problem, or you might be the blind spot that is maybe causing this not to happen. And I think this is a big part of the uncertainty. This is a big part of some of the imposter syndrome and other things that people come to me with, because they'll be like, look, should I be doing something different? Am I thinking it through? Basically, am I the problem or they? So what we want to look at today is, how do you have a conversation that lays out that problem, your career goals, lets your company know you're committed to the process, but also lets them know that you know your value? And that honestly, and we're going to come back to this a few times, that at the end of the day, inaction is going to be seen as an action, which is going to cause you to respond. Because these aren't always pleasant conversations. They're not always fun. As a leader, I've had people come to me plenty of times, and those are not the sort of meetings that you're like, yay, this is going to be fun, but it is necessary. It is a part of leadership. It's a part of growth, and that isn't always fun or easy. And I think more than anything is that, how do you do this in a way that gets the action you want and fixes the problem, but doesn't burn down that relationship or your reputation in the process? And all of this, striking this balance, is not an easy trick to pull off. So look, I think the other thing I want to say here quickly is before we get into how I found success in those sort of moments, I do want to qualify this, that if you're at a company that is abusive, that is toxic, that is sexist, that is racist, that are any of those sort of things, then I'm just going to say now, just go ahead and skip this episode. Because if any of those things are happening, know that you need to leave as soon as you can. There is not a way to work through that. There's not a way to justify it. There is, and again, I had a conversation with a woman the other day who was absolutely working at a boys' club. And that was exactly what they wanted. And they would continue to minimize her, to do a lot of things where there was no reason to save. There was no reason to invest in that culture. And I think that's that line between needing to work the system or stand up for yourself and understand your value, and knowing when the system is so broken, abusive, or toxic that no outcome is going to be worth the damage it's going to do to you. So this episode is not for those situations, right? Because those are not ones that are worth staying at. They're not worth the damage they do to you or anything else. So these are the ones that are more in the day-to-day corporate business reality, because businesses don't want to give up more money willingly, right? They want to hold on to as much profit as they can. So that's what we want to talk about. But here, let's start with this, because I think whether you are in either one of the positions of trying to figure out to leave or trying to figure out how to get promoted, the biggest thing I've found that you need, and I think often the hardest thing to come by, is perspective. And that's what a lot of these coaching sessions are really seeking. And I think this is an important approach. What I'm going to lay out here is important, because there have been times in my career when I have been so frustrated, I've been so certain that I know exactly what leadership is thinking or what they're not doing, that I also almost gave up or quit on something that, look, in some cases, why I left, I was 100% right. Like, I should have, my boss was insane or toxic, or I did not have the ability to do good work. But two very distinct times in my career, I later realized I was too in my head. I was too blinded by what I wanted, or I was too focused on what was wrong, and that I almost left something that really would have been great. Like, one of the big examples was when I was at Starwood. After I'd been there for 3 years, things just weren't progressing. I was frustrated. I'd started to interview. And honestly, it was probably outside of the fact that nothing else in those interviews, I just couldn't find anything I wanted. And so I ended up staying there. And then Apple calls and sort of everything else falls out after that. But I was really close to almost walking out on what would have been the best work of my career. And it shook me up. It woke me up. It made me look at this. And I think this happens after you've been at a job for a while. And I think this happens for a couple of reasons, because whenever you first get to a job, everything is new, right? Like, your vision is wide open. You're taking it all in. Everything feels new and wonderful and interesting. But after you've been there for a while, those positives really start to normalize, meaning that they don't feel as positive as they used to when you first started. They feel like everyday work. And I think that can be a challenge to keep yourself open to those, because often what happens is the longer you're there, sort of the more your vision narrows, and that I think in a lot of cases, the negatives start to stand out more and more. I'll often refer to this as something I call frustration blindness, which is really where you just focus on what's wrong, where what's holding you back. That's all you see. You just focus on the barriers and everything else, because everything else has just become so commonplace that your vision really, really narrows in. And whenever that happens, then obviously the appeal of going someplace new, I think a big piece of that is because whenever you go someplace new, your vision widens all out again, and that everything is new and it feels really positive and it feels really good. And so again, I think that's sort of the moment, or the thing that you're chasing, is to have your perspective and to have the positive and the negatives rebalance. Now, in some cases, that move is a really good thing, that it helps you to be able to move on, to progress, to get new opportunities. But I think sometimes people do it because they don't want to deal with either issues that they have, problems in their career, problems with the way of working, and that if their boss is on them to say, look, you really need to work on this, and well, if I don't think it's a problem and I don't want to work on it, well, then the possibility of going someplace else where they're not going to see that as being an issue and I can sort of be how I want again is really appealing. But there, I think that gets into a plan that doesn't work long term. It'll make you happy in the short term, but again, you'll start to watch a lot of people jump from job to job to job to job, because they keep running into that same problem. They keep starting to get the same feedback. They keep starting to get those sort of things, and they'll just jump to another job so they don't have to deal with it, honestly. Now, I think this is something you have to be aware of. And I think the longer you're in a role, the more your vision narrows and the harder it is to get that perspective. And it's a lot of work to keep that broad perspective and see the positives that are there. And I think many times in my coaching sessions, it's interesting because I think they don't go, or they don't end the way that people would think. And I think they're often surprised, because what I want to point out to them is that there may be a lot of good things. Maybe there's a lot of support. Maybe there's things that are there that are actually going to be really hard to find, or it's going to take them months or years to rebuild. And sometimes you need that external perspective to be able to see that maybe there is more there than you think. But again, I think part of what I try to do in constructing this process, or to approach it, is also for you to be able to evaluate what is your role, what is your position, is it a justified ask, is it something, or are you a bit of the blind spot? Are you sort of having this frustration blindness, and it's just easier to go someplace else and start over than deal with some of these problems? But enough about the preamble, right? Like, let's get down to business and talk about this approach, because it's pretty simple, but I think it does some pretty important things. Ultimately, what we want to construct is a conversation. And it's a conversation between you and your leadership, and it needs to do a few things. I think first, it needs to really clearly outline either what are you struggling with, or why do you think that it is time for you to get promoted and take that next step. I think that it needs to create a plan of action. And I think it needs to put a time frame on resolving that plan so that you can understand, should you quit? Are you going to get promoted? But it's not something that just goes on infinitely, because I think in a lot of cases, this is where people get frustrated, is because it's like, oh, kick the can down the road. How do I know that I'm paying into a bank that functionally doesn't have a hole in the bottom, right? I want to make sure that I'm investing in a team and a place that respects me and values me. And I think the last thing is that, honestly, and this can usually be the harder part, and this is the part that too many people miss, but you want to outline what actions are you prepared to take if nothing changes or nothing happens. And I think that's a really important part, because people need to know you're serious. But like I said, this is also really about two things. And I think whenever you go into this mentally, this is sort of where your head needs to be at. Because one, this is about striking a balance. You need to find a balance between trying to resolve the problem or get the promotion, but also working with them and having a conversation with doing it, but creating a sense of urgency that things need to change, right? There has to functionally be an or else. And I think it has to give you answers, because I think you need to get an understanding of where is your boss or your company at on these issues. Are they willing to invest in you? Are they willing to resolve them? And honestly, for me, it's also really come down to, in many cases, that if I am going to leave, either because I'm not getting promoted and I feel like I'm stuck, or because I just feel like I should quit because I'm not doing my best work here. For me, I need to know that if I do choose to leave, that I have done everything I could possibly do before that happened. Because it really is, and look, and this is the part that I think a lot of people don't, again, necessarily realize. If you like the people you work with, if you love your team, if you love the work, I think especially, this is even harder, I think, if you're a leader and leading that team, quitting feels like an insanely selfish act. Because especially as creatives and things like that, so much of what we do is how do we create work? How do we do things? How do we come together? As a leader, it's about what are we doing? What direction are we going in? Well, quitting is an I statement. I have chosen that what I want to do is more important than the rest of you, and I am going to go in a different direction. So for me to be able to make peace with that, to feel good about that, to try to reduce how selfish I'm going to feel in that moment, this is why I need to feel like I've really exhausted every angle. And I think, for me, in the times whenever I have quit jobs, it's a rare moment in my life when I've known the moment and actually planned the moment when I was going to either disappoint or hurt or frustrate a lot of people. And that's that moment when I walk in and tell my team that I'm leaving. Because some people may have joined to work with you. Some people may really like that. Some people are really invested in the future of the team that you're trying to craft. And now you're going to replace that or give them something different. And that's a tough moment to be in. But here's what this needs to be. And we touched on it a little bit. But this needs to be a conversation, right? This is not a list of demands. This is not a hostage situation. Because the other thing, as in any negotiation, is you have to have some amount of empathy for the other side. And as a leader, it isn't always as simple as I can fix a problem or promote somebody, even if I want to. So this needs to be a conversation where you understand that. And you do have, I would say, limited empathy to their side of the relationship. Because on the one hand, like I said, it might not be that I can promote you tomorrow. But I might be able to do it in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. I can be open around what that is. We can have a dialogue around what that is. And then it's going to be up to you to decide, is that term and that time frame okay? I think this also has to be a process you want to work. Because you have to be open to the process and want it to work. If you're just going to go through the motions and then quit, right? Like, save yourself the effort, because the only thing you're going to do is just damage your reputation. That's not going to be a good outcome, right? Like, if you just want the raise so that whenever you go to the next job, you can use that as some counter offer, just skip it. Because I've been through people that do that. And look, honestly, every single week, people still reach out to me to get recommendations of people who used to be on my team and what did I think about them and would I work on with them again? And if they if they wasted my time, if I went to bat for them, if I really tried to get them what they wanted, and they rewarded that functionally with screwing me over and quitting as soon as they got it, and it becomes so clear that I got used, that is going to be a part of what I'm going to tell somebody, is that when push comes to shove, they may be selfish and screw you over. So only do this if you want it to work. And look, I think this is something you can only do once, or you can only do once in a very long time. This is a serious conversation, right? With serious stakes. So it's something you're not going to be able to do every 6 months or every year. So I think make sure these issues are big enough and that you are frustrated enough to go through this, because if you do it too much, then it's not going to work. Or if you're not willing to follow through with it, which we're going to talk about, right? Like, if you're not willing to really have this be a serious conversation, this sort of turns into like the employee who cried wolf, of like, I'm really frustrated, I'm going to leave. But if push comes to shove, you won't do it. If the problems aren't that real, if you try to do this every month, then it loses its effectiveness. But let's move on and actually get into what this is. And so I think this approach has 3 parts. And before you have this conversation, you need to take the time to go through each one of these to figure out, where are you at? What's your bottom line? What do you want to express or talk about? Now, the first one is that you need to actually define what are the issues. And this is where you need to lay out, what are the things that are wrong? What are the blockers? What are you frustrated with? that are making you want to leave or why you think you should be promoted. Now, these things need to be either issues or problems or places where you can demonstrate your value or how you're working in the same way as your peers that can either be realistically fixed, accomplished, or proven. That if it is something where it's like, oh, well, whatever it is, I want it to rain ice cream every day, that is not realistic and it can't be accomplished. So again, I think you have to make sure that these are things that you feel like can really be fixed. And the other thing I'll tell you is that there shouldn't be more than probably 3 to 4 of them at most. Because the thing is that if there's more than those, it is either unrealistic, or if you sit down and say there are 15 things that I think are seriously broken, maybe just take that as a sign that you should probably just leave. Because the time it's going to take to fix 15 things is not going to be insignificant. But again, I want to be able to keep it to a set of things that, like I said, they can be fixed, that they're going to have a real impact, ideally also for more than just me. Because the chances are that also if you're finding these issues or you're finding them frustrating, probably other people are too. Now, again, this is about trying to figure out, is that just affecting you? Is it affecting other people? Does leadership care? But again, if it's like 20 things, too many. But write them down, prioritize them, get to 3 to 4. The next thing is, you need to be able to sit down and figure out what's the time frame, which is really defining the amount of time you're willing to wait to see if this is going to happen. Now, here again, because as with any negotiation, with any sort of discussion, you need to think about what can be accomplished. So for me, what I would say is this needs to be reasonable. And look, you do this because in many cases, change can't happen overnight. You can't get promoted overnight. I can't fix a process overnight. But what I'm looking for here is that I'm looking for transparency and I'm looking for accountability that change will happen. I'm also looking for a two-way accountability. That is my boss willing to commit to when they think they can get it done? What is it reasonable for? What is the time frame in which I can expect some change to be able to happen? Now, again, my intent would be that there continues to be a two-way conversation because that's what the transparency and accountability needs to be, is that they will fix this thing. They will have this conversation. They will work on launching a process. They will look like whatever that thing is. What is the plan for that? What is the time frame for that? When are we going to check in on that? And again, how long am I willing to wait? Because if I am only willing to wait 2 months and they think it's going to take 2 years, then we just need to understand that the delta between those two is too big and that this isn't going to work. But the other thing here that really goes to the third part of it, and I think this is why the time frame is also important, is you need to start to set a tone and an understanding that leadership needs to understand that inaction is going to be seen as an action. That if there is no transparency, if there is no accountability, if they just keep kicking the can down the road, if the person is always busy, they can't have the conversation, like blah, blah, whatever. Then I think you need to really understand, and the last thing is define what's your bottom line. And that's letting them know that if nothing happens, that you are then going to know that you are not valued here and you're going to be forced to take some action. And I think you need to know what that something is going to be. Is that going to be as big as you're going to quit? And look, I mean, I think even I've said to people, like, look, I'm not going to come in and like rage quit and like all of a sudden be like, screw this place and like pack up all my shit and leave. But know that if nothing happens in 3 months, you can assume that I'm actively interviewing and looking to leave. And that whenever that happens, I'm out of here. It could be something a little more medium-sized. Are you going to transfer to another department? Are you going to want to go work with a different leader? Are you going to want to make some change? But I think you need to be clear on what your bottom line is going to be. And again, a bottom line that you will actually go through with. Because that's the thing, is that there has to be some stake, some consequence, something in this that gets it taken seriously. Because, look, that's why I said a lot of this for me is written with the empathy of somebody who's in a leadership position, that in a lot of times I've got 87 things on my plate and they're all screaming for my attention. And that's why I said, I think for me, I need to know, is this just a casual annoyance? Is this something you would just like to get fixed and be a nice to have? Or is this a real deal breaker, right? That if this doesn't get done, if something doesn't get, if something isn't different, that I'm going to lose you from my team. Because as a leader, that's not always clear. People don't always communicate that clearly. And that sometimes you'll misread that of a small thing you think is a big thing, or a big thing is a small thing, or vice versa. And if you get it wrong, then you can lose great talent. So again, if I like who I'm working with and I think there's something to salvage, then that's why I want to do that. But I think, so once you have sat down and you've thought through the issues, you thought about a time frame, you thought about a bottom line, and look, and I think if you have people at work who you trust, try running it by them, saying, hey, look, what do you think about this? Is this a problem for you too? Again, is this something that you would think is reasonable? Do you think this is something they're going to fix? Because again, knowing that there may be a tendency of that frustration blindness, getting another set of eyes on this, not a bad idea. But once you've been able to sort of vet that, you feel like this is a place where, again, you're not asking for, a diamond-plated Ferrari or something, then what you want to be able to do is set up a meeting with your boss or with the leadership to have this conversation. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is to make this meeting longer than you think, just in case. And, so like on the one hand, don't try to do this in 15 minutes and just sort of make it a drive-by. I know there can be that tendency, especially because if it feels like it might be an uncomfortable conversation, or if you're not really used to standing up for yourself like this, you may just want to do a hit and run of just like run in, say something, and run out. That doesn't feel like investment. That doesn't feel like you're taking the process that seriously. So make it longer than you think. So I'd probably say 45 minutes to an hour to be safe, because I'd rather have the time and not use it than book 15 minutes and realize that I needed 45, and all of a sudden I'm cutting an important conversation short. And also be situationally aware, right? Don't do it before or after they're going to have some big meeting or some, important get together or some big presentation, because they're not going to be able to focus, because either their brain's going to be on the meeting coming up or burnt out from the meeting they just came out of. So again, that doesn't mean wait a month, but just be aware when there may be big deadlines or those sort of things. Now, I think how you start this conversation also makes a massive difference, because what I want to be able to do is I want to start this conversation by making it really clear and lead with that I am invested in this process and I'm invested in this company. Because again, there is a way to be able to do that negotiation where it feels like both sides are invested and want it to work, and there's another way where this feels like a stick up. So I will usually start by saying something along the lines of, like, I want to stay at this company. I really like this team. I like this work. Like, again, point out what the positives are and what are, like, I want to invest in. But I am not in a position to be successful, or I feel like I should be promoted because. And the reason why I want to do this is I want them to hear right from the beginning that I am invested in this process, that I don't want to leave, that there are things that are pushing me into that place. Because what I also want to make clear is that my decision to leave really is going to be up to them. That these sort of things of like, look, I need this to be fixed to be successful. I'm not just quitting. I'm not pouting. I'm not checking out. But I need help, or I need you to recognize my value. And I think hopefully these are things you've discussed with them before. But look, I may want to give them the benefit of the doubt, like I said before, and maybe they don't know how serious it was, or maybe they don't know what things are really getting in the way. But I want to make sure that they understand that their time, their investment, their effort will be reciprocated, that I am as invested in this as possible. Because like I said, a lot of leaders have been burned by people who do this, pull the stunt, get the money, still check out, don't change. And that those people, while invisible, honestly, are also really in that room with you. That this isn't just about you and the leader you work for. It's about all the other people that they've worked with over their career, which is going to inform their leadership perspective and how they go about this. Now, the other part of that is sort of how you shape the rest of that conversation, how the way you approach it can happen in one of two ways. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to the personalities that you're working with. And I think this is going to be up to you to understand your boss's or your leadership's way of working to know which approach is going to be better from there. Because I've worked with some bosses, and they are really, really, what they want is they're really good if I lead with solutions, right? So this is leaders who want to know exactly what to do. What do I want to do about it? What needs to be fixed, right? Like, tell me, give me specifics. And if that's the case, then you want to use that approach where you go through and say, like, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, this I think we should do, and propose 1, 2, 3 to be able to change that. Because if that's their way of working, then you want to be able to do that. Now, I've also worked with other bosses who want to be, they're leaders, they want to be more involved, right? They want to be more of a discussion. They want to be able to get in and sort of figure it out with you and have that investment, which is great. And that often if you try to get in and just hit them with the solution, then that doesn't tend to work very well for them. So for them, what I want to go in then is I want to go in and I want to lead with questions. So I want to say that I'm being blocked by X, and it is causing me to not be able to do X. So what do you think we could do to improve this situation? How can we fix this? How can we remove this blocker? Right? Like, I want to be able to sort of propose that and then let us both talk it out. Now, obviously, I have ideas in mind, but I think sometimes, because I think a lot of this also is about tone and how you approach it. And so I think letting them know that you're taking the time to focus on this, that you're going to lead with that investment, that you're going to tailor this to be able to work with that. Because ultimately, here again, what I want to be able to do is to create that two-way accountability, right? Just like any good plan, you want that two-way accountability where you and your leadership have next steps to work on. Now, more than likely, there's going to be more work for leadership, but that's okay given what we're dealing with. But I want it to make sure that everybody knows that we're both invested in this process. But like I said, at the end of this, though, it is making it clear that something needs to happen. And it's a little strange because I've actually done this multiple times, and that most of the promotions I've gotten have been, look, do you feel like I should be promoted? Yes, we feel like you should be promoted. Is there some blocker? Yes, there's some blocker. Okay, great. I understand that. What do we think is a reasonable amount of time? And it's like, well, in 6 months, we can definitely get this done. Great. So what I need you to know is that, because for me, 6 months is a long time. Other things are going to creep up. Other priorities are going to be there, right? So I want to keep this an issue that is on their mind. And I will say, again, even if and you lean into that position of power, that if we're back here in 6 months, and the answer is, well, it's going to be another 6 months, that's not going to be an acceptable answer. That this is my life's work. This is what I love to do. I don't have an infinite amount of time to be able to do it. And so I want to be here. I want to have that value here, but I need you to show me that you see it and it shows up in a real way. Because I need them to know that I'm serious and that, like I said, inaction is an action. Now, after that, there's sort of the aftermath, the aftercare, the follow-up, whatever you want to call it. Now, one of the things I usually do is I'll tell you to put whatever got discussed in writing. And this is where I want to start documenting, recapping, sending emails of, either what's been getting done, what hasn't been getting done, asking and say, hey, we said this was going to happen on Wednesday. It's a week later. What's going on? I think it's an important step to make because I want to make sure, one, everyone is clear about what was discussed. I want to make sure that everybody agrees to that. But the reality is that also, again, in a step to make sure that people understand that this is serious, that whenever you will see somebody start to document things in writing, tends to feel a lot more serious. And so again, a lot of this is about just subtly letting my boss know that I'm not kidding and that this is the sort of lengthened thing I want to do to be able to resolve it. And I think the last part of this then is the follow through, because as we talked about, this is all about something needing to happen. So if you lay out those issues, you create the consequences, then they do nothing, right? That either the follow through has to be on their end so that something is going to change, or the follow through has to be on your end, where with whatever your bottom line was, if that time goes, if that doesn't happen, if they don't take it seriously, then you need to follow through on that bottom line. And the reason why this is so important is because if you don't, you're really going to lose all your leverage. Because the next time there's an issue, the next time there's a problem, the next time you go and say, oh, this is a problem, I'm really angry about it, they're going to go, well, yeah, you were angry about that before and you told me you're going to quit, and it's a year later and you're still here. So, again, a lot of this is about making sure that you are taken seriously, making sure that, again, that follow-through happens. And the other reason why is because, again, a lot of what we're talking about here is to get you those answers. Because in the aftermath, you will see, are they taking it seriously? Are the conversations really happening? Are they coming to you proactively to say, I'm doing this. This is going well. This is not going well. This conversation went badly. Here's what I'm doing instead. Right? Like, are they actively engaging with you and trying to fix it? Or are they just letting it coast and you're having to chase the answers? Right? Because at the end of the day, with so much of this, and maybe this is just the way my brain works, but for me, actions will always tell you the truth, right? Will somebody walk their talk? And at the end of the day, especially in issues like this, look, it's not hard for a leader to say the right things. It's not hard to say, oh, I'll take care of you. Oh, I'll get you that salary increase. Oh, I'll do whatever that is. I'll make it right for the team. I'll make sure people get promoted, right? Like that, it's easy to say. Show me. Walk your talk. Where are the promotions? Where's the raise? Were you able to do that, right? Like I'm not looking for blood out of a stone, but I'm also like, show me that you really are taking this seriously and that the team matters. And that's a lot of this, what this is, right? Creating the situations where you can see, will they walk their talk? Now, I think this process is important because for you and for so many people I talk to, too often people are in situations where they are just grateful to have a job. They don't stand up for themselves, and they don't really stand up in sort of key moments in their career. I think this is why, as we've talked about, most people don't negotiate job offers. They don't negotiate the terms of a layoff. And I think it's often why they go through processes like this where they just quit, because in many cases it may be easier for them or a little bit more comfortable than understanding their value. And I think it's really easy to understand why you feel small compared to a whole company or a team. And it's easy to be able to just say, well, it's easier for me to go do something else. But that's the thing that I've learned, though, right? In that moment of standing up for yourself, in that moment of believing in yourself, can lead to a great career path. It can lead to some of the best work of your career. It can lead to, again, staying someplace where you've built something, where you've invested in something, because for all of us, at some point, you're going to have to figure out how do you break through that. You can't just keep jumping to a new place every time there's a problem. But it's how do you do that with empathy? How do you show up and ask for that? And then watch what happens. Because I think that's going to tell you really everything you need to know about the leaders you're working with. And are they worth staying there? Are they worth you sticking with them? Are they worth your time and investing in them? But again, I think it's also up to you to understand that everything is not just I snap my fingers and it's easily done. But how do you find the balance? Because as hard as it can be, I found that nobody's going to take care of you more or stand up for you if you're not going to do it for yourself. And that part of showing up as an equal whenever you're going into a job, showing up as an equal to your company, like whenever you're in a job or whenever you're thinking about leaving a job or getting promoted, right? Like these are difficult moments because there's a lot in this industry, there's a lot in this world that doesn't really encourage you to think or act that way. But for me, I think this ability of just being able to give it a chance, to figure out if it's worth saving, to be able to not just jump to the easier, newer, where you, like I said, you may be dooming yourself to just keep repeating the same problem and teaching yourself that whenever it gets hard, because I think especially the longer you get in your career, the things that are left to work on get a hell of a lot harder. They're the things that, you know what, they're not quite as obvious. They're tucked away in the dark corners a little bit more. They're more long-standing issues. They're more long-standing problems. They're things that aren't simple. And I've seen too many careers that get plateaued or stuck because people won't have a simple conversation. They won't be able to go through and work at this stuff. And I believe with this approach, this is going to give you that answer. This is going to help you believe in yourself. This is going to help you be able to, like I said, really understand, is this the right move or not? And if it is time to go on to do something else, that you can walk away with it in the most humane, emotionally intelligent way of knowing that you did everything you could for yourself and for others before that happened. And I think that in a difficult moment like this is really the most you can hope for. So I hope this helps. As usual, I'll have all the show notes for all this over at thecrazy1.com. Again, thecrazy1.com. Especially now that the episodes are showing up with a bit more regularity. Give myself a little self-5 for that one. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, so whenever you get the latest episodes, whenever those come out. And hey, once again, remember, leave a review. Do me a favor. As always, everybody down in legal wants me to remind you that these are just my own opinions, and as I am still fun and unemployed, these are just the views. These do not represent the views of any of my former employers. Hopefully a future employer is on the horizon. But lastly, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time. I know that time is the only true luxury any of us have. I'm always incredibly humbled that you want to spend any of it listening to me. So go out there, have a conversation, figure out what's going on, figure out if you can save this thing, figure out if it's time to move on or quit or stay or figure all that out. And all the while, remember, stay crazy.